Next up on the Corona Hat Challenge is tuck stitch. Tuck stitch can substantially change the gauge of your knitting, though it doesn't always. It depends on how dense the stitch is. Stitches like this do. This is every fourth needle selected to hold or tuck stitches and knitted for 3 rows. It gets wider and a good bit shorter than stockinette. This one gets 8 rows through the inch, where we were getting 6 rows in stockinette. This one changes gauge less. It's very similar to the first design I showed you, but only every 6th stitch is selected to tuck, and that reduces the density of the fabric. Often the purl side is used as the right side of tuck, but it can be the knit side as well, which tends to have a bumpy appearance, and sometimes we emulate popcorn stitch with careful selection. The settings for tuck, if manually selecting, which is what we'll do in this movie, are normal stockinette settings, except we make sure the carriage is set to hold the stitches that are all the way forward. This is the setting on the Corona. The same on the Singer Silver Reed Studio family of machine. The H button on the Knit King Brother family. Because tuck is so often used with the purl side as the right side, we normally want either a ribbed hem or a hung hem, because the rolled hem turns in the wrong direction to set off a hat that's using purl as the right side. So all of these patterns will count on you either using 8 rows of ribbing or 16 rows and hanging the hem, because of those 16 rows, you only get 8 rows of length since the hem is doubled. So here I'm working on a ribbed hem. Here we're selecting every 4th needle, tucking for 3 rows. In other words, allowing that needle to collect loops of yarn for 3 rows, but not knit them off until the 4th row. I'm selecting using the bottom one of these 2 homemade combs. Making these combs is a separate movie. I'll put a link in the program notes in case you don't have the combs you need. On the Corona, I've noticed that the tuck stitch, because it causes the stitches to stay up very, very close to the sinkers, will sometimes actually hang up on them. So you're seeing the solution. Pull down the knitting after every row or 2 gently. Here we're tucking for 3 rows, then changing the carriage setting from the tuck setting to number 1 to number 2 for the 4th row. That will cause the needles to automatically get knitted back from hold. And then the next time, we must remember to reset the lever to 1, and to create those little diamonds, we'll select the alternate set of needles. Right now, every 4th needle, beginning with needle 3 from the left, is tucking. Next time, we will select the center needle from the group of 3 that was knitting normally, which is needle number 5 from the left, and every 4th across. Since it takes 8 rows of this stitch to make an inch, we need more than we do for the stockinette hats. Given that we've already got a hem going, we need 40 rows of tuck, followed by 6 rows of plain stockinette. Just as for the slip hats, I avoid tucking all the way to the top of the crown to prevent it from being overly bulky. In this case, I did not refigure the number of stitches, even though the tucked area will be wider, because we have a nice brim that's going to fit the head snugly, and the looseness of the hat is a design feature. The fabric with the wider diamonds was created in exactly the same manner using the top comb, which selects every 6th needle. Here's the fabric where we used slip stitch to create individual lines. We can do the same with tuck stitch with a somewhat different effect. Here I've only selected 3 needles across the bed, widely spaced. And notice my mistake here so that you don't make it. One of the needles is not as far forward as it needed to be, therefore it went ahead and knitted, and I had to go back and fix it to turn it into a tuck stitch by unknitting it, lifting the loop of yarn onto the needle, and letting it sit there and wait. And that turned out okay. It's not absolutely perfect, but for this demo, it's okay. For this design, we're only going to tuck for one row, so I changed to the number 2 setting so the needles would knit back from hold. Now selecting a needle to either side of the one that most recently tucked. And we're going to make a little arrow shape by doing this. You can easily view which stitch tucked, but you should probably also follow a chart or make a list of which needles are going to go into tuck position. For a pattern like this that tucks only for one row, you can leave the left lever set on the tuck position and the right lever set on the knit back from hold position, and they will behave themselves and do what you want every time. So now I'm going farther out, one needle more to the right and one needle more to the left of those that tucked last time. Doing that for several more rows. And tuck stitch as widely spaced as this doesn't change the gauge of the fabric very much. And it's a little bit hard to discern exactly how much because it is so small. And I think just adding to a simple hat like this 2 to 4 rows is usually adequate. So this hat was 16 hem rows. Hang the hem, knit the arrow working the tuck stitch for 32 to 4 rows, and then 6 rows of plain stocking. This little bow tie effect is fun. It's the same exact technique that you saw, but we select every 8th needle across, tuck for 3 rows, set the carriage to knit back, knit on all the needles for 1 row, then select the alternate set of needles. In this case, the alternate set should begin by using the 4th of the 7 stitches that we're knitting between every tucked stitch on the previous selection. This will distort the row gauge a little bit more than the arrows, so you should actually swatch. But I know some of you aren't going to want to, so I'm going to suggest 36 to 8 tuck rows, followed by 6 stockinette rows, and then scrap off. This is every other needle tuck. Going left, we tuck. Going right, we release and knit all the stitches. Then select the alternate needles, the group that was not selected in the previous row. This time they will tuck. I find this looks especially nice in these variegated yarns. Its gauge is very similar to the smaller of the diamonds. So if you don't want to check your swatch and refigure the numbers, you can use the numbers that go with that hat. One nice thing about this design is that the knit side is close to smooth. It looks like a slightly pebble textured stockinette. That means that if you need to knit extra large garments or a blanket, many times you can get a wide enough piece of fabric in a single span of the needles. For example, supposing you want a cardigan with a 60-inch chest. The back of it needs to be 30 inches wide. That's a little past the usual ability of the machine to deliver, but not in tuck stitch. Designs like these don't change the overall fabric much, so they're about as warm as stockinette. But designs like these that make a denser fabric, trap more air, use more yarn, and are a significantly warmer fabric. These tuck hats are part of a long strip of hats that I'm knitting along with my Facebook Corona group in a challenge to see how many hats we can knit in one strip and how many different techniques this December. There's a video to cover each kind of hat. They all fit into this playlist, and there is a link to that in the program notes so you can find them. The entire playlist and challenge is loosely based on my Stripping for Charity book, which contains the same techniques and some others, and many more sizes and gauges than we're covering here. In case that interests you, there's a link to the page where you can buy the book in the program notes. As of today, my strip of hats is 25 long and includes slip, tuck, fur, weaving, 2-color knitting, and cables. And December's not over yet, so stay tuned.